Hi, everyone. I am excited to bring to you today a very special conversation. Daniel reached out to me over email to let me know that he would be happy to come on my show and represent a minority view in the Catholic space. I myself hold some minority views. For instance, my Mereological Nihilism is a rather minority view, so I was thrilled to have Daniel on the show. Daniel is a Catholic Geocentrist. We start the interview with a brief introduction as to who Daniel is, then I ask Daniel about geocentrism and young earth creationism, and then Daniel asks me about mereological nihilism. As always, I will ask you, my audience, to be your normal, polite selves. I like to think that this little YouTube channel has garnered a reputation as a place where we entertain ideas that we don't all necessarily accept, and we do so respectfully. Please keep being your respectful selves in the comments section down below, which frankly I'm sure you would have done even if I didn't add this little blurb here at the outset. Before the conversation begins, though, I would like to read a note from Daniel. Daniel says that sometimes he thinks he does a bad job articulating his positions, but his only ask is that if something sounds strange or interesting, then please look up some of the sources that he mentions for geocentrism, namely the 2020 documentary, The End of Quantum Reality, and the 2014 documentary, The Principle. And he recommends the work of Dr. Robert J. Bennett for explanations of geostationary satellites and retrograde motion behavior questions, which didn't really come up much in the conversation that you're about to hear. For creation, he recommends the work The Doctrines of Genesis 1 through 11, a compendium and defense of traditional Catholic theology on origins. Regarding philosophy, Daniel adds that he thinks that his own thoughts are better expressed in the works of Dostoevsky, Evelyn Waugh, and the Church Fathers, and in the films of Kurosawa than he himself could even express. And finally, Daniel adds that he submits everything that he has said to the judgment of the Church. Daniel's statement is reproduced in the description down below with links to the sources that he mentioned. With that, please enjoy my conversation about Catholic geocentrism and other topics with Daniel. I'm excited to talk to you. You reached out to me over email. I believe it was after I had a conversation with an ex-SSPV person, right?
I can't remember, but probably you're right, because I also listened to the Jimmy Akin one and Gideon Lazar.
Yes.
But it was probably the SSPV that was when I emailed in.
Okay, cool. And I only know the littlest bit about your background, so I'm going to ask you about that kind of stuff. But I guess a super general question today: would you use the label traditional Catholic to describe yourself?
Yes. I would say that I would like it to be just Catholic, but I think anybody else would describe me like that, so I'm fine with the label.
And I think that's a fair point to make. So let me kind of just ask you, I guess, about your other people would call you traditional Catholic today. Did you grow up like that? Kind of take me back to the beginning and tell me, I guess, a little bit about your religious upbringing.
Yeah, I think we went to the Novus Ordo until I was maybe 13, 14, on and off a little bit. I received my first communion in the traditional Latin Mass. So yeah, actually maybe more around First Communion time we started to go, and then by I would say 13, 14, that's when, unless there was some, we were traveling or something, we always went to the Latin Mass.
That's what my family was too. We would really only go to one Novus Ordo Mass a year if we did go to one, and that was when we went on vacation. We grew up in New Jersey, so when we would go up to the Catskill Mountains in New York, we couldn't find a traditional Latin Mass for a number of years. We eventually wound up finding one that we had to drive over an hour to get to, but hey, that's nothing for most traditionalists, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up
Um,
FSSP. What kind of
mhm.
traditionalist did
uh,
you wind up in?
so we grew up. It was actually, I think, one of the oldest Latin masses in Lexington, Regina Pacis, but originally wasn't associated with the FSSP. Um, it was a diocesan approved. Different people, priests from the diocese would go, and then we got a full-time pastor. And then when he had to retire and go up, the FSSP came in.
That's right.
Um,
And now, if I'm getting ahead of myself, forgive me, but we both know a certain priest, and I won't use the name on here, but Father F. Um,
yeah,
he was the pastor of my church for a while, and then he came down to Lexington. Um, and it's hilarious because I had no idea that I was going to wind up following in Father F's footsteps just 15 years after he did it, right? So that's pretty funny.
yes, yeah. It's funny how things wind up like that. I knew some people who went to that church who ended up coming to Lexington, but I can't recall the names, and I wouldn't want to say them anyway. But
Yeah.
I did meet some people that have moved
That
from there.
Man, isn't the traditional world so small? It really is. It's so funny when you start talking to people and you realize
Yes,
you know the same people.
although sometimes the world in general, whenever you're in sort of any sort of like community, like I was involved in sort of competitive chess for a little while, and I mean, that is a really small world. I mean, oh, this grandmaster from Russia who I've read about, oh, there he is right there, doing some
That's pretty
lessons for
cool.
him. So
Yeah.
it's a small world.
Yeah, that's fair. Whenever you get more and more like specific, there's going to be fewer and fewer people involved, I guess. And hey, I guess like traditional Catholicism is like a very specific form of Catholicism. So I guess just like being a really involved in competitive chess, I guess it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, there's a mathematic term called the Eredish number, which is how many degrees of separation you are from the famous mathematician Paul Eredish. He was a wandering mathematician, but everyone he published with about 4,000 people. So if you published with somebody who published with Eredish, then your number is 2 or whatever, and everybody's like 4 degrees from Eredish.
That's really funny. It's like the
Something of an
7 degrees
Eredish
of
number of 4. So.
That's pretty funny. That's like that people talk about the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever. Like everybody is related to Kevin Bacon or something like that. I don't really.
I have heard this. I'm not actually sure what the yeah, it's related. I actually don't know who Kevin Bacon is.
He was an actor who
Okay.
wasn't he in like he was like an '80s actor, I think. Right?
Okay, yeah. This is 80s. I only know Taiwan
Okay.
in terms of films. So
Interesting.
uh
Okay. So, um, I'm interested. So in your not your first, but like your second email to me, I think you said something to the effect of like, "Hey, I I I know that the traditionalist movement attracts all types of characters. I'm a certain type of character myself, and I know that you hold some views that some people would consider views that a certain type of character might hold. Do you want to tell me a little
yeah.
bit about some of those views?
We're talking about the young Earth and geocentrism.
Yes.
I am assuming.
Yep.
Yeah, so and definitely a young Earth, mildly associated with the Colby Center, and then sort of I'm a personal geocentrist. I wouldn't argue any sort of weight of like the Catholic Church upon geocentrism. I mean, some have argued that, but I certainly wouldn't go there with that. But I do think. I think most likely the Earth is not revolving around the sun, and whether or not the Earth is rotating, um, I'm agnostic in a still studying sort of way.
And let me ask you, are these views more like and I want to phrase this correctly. Would you say that your reason for believing these things is mostly theological, mostly scientific, or like 50-50 or maybe 75-25 one way or the other?
I would say the geocentrism I got into because of religion, but I would say like I would say why holding it now has nothing to do with it. And then, whereas sort of young Earth creationism, I would say, is more like 100%, 100. I don't know how to put a 100%, 100%, but that one is definitely more entwined with. I do believe that it's very hard to not accept it and splice everything together, I would say.
Yeah. So let me ask this question. So let's say that, tomorrow somehow you found out that like Catholicism is not true. Would you still be a young Earth creationist, but you wouldn't still be a geocentrist?
Um,
Or is it kind of too
I
hard?
I think, I think, I think I would be a I think I would be some sort of um yeah, that isn't. I mean, it's hard to go into these. I mean, I think I would hold. I would still hold the opinions. I think I would. Um, mm, uh, and geocentrism definitely, because I really don't think it has much to do with the faith.
Oh, so it's almost the opposite of what I said.
Yes,
So
it's
okay.
almost the opposite. I don't mean, yeah, it's hard to like. It's hard to yeah, it's hard to conceive, but I get what you're trying to ask is like how embedded is it in the traditional Catholicism as opposed to other things, but it's hard to unembed beliefs.
Yes. One of the hardest things that you can do is to like know thyself, and then it's even harder to know thyself in like a counterfactual sense. Like I'm not only asking you to self-psychologize, but I'm asking you to self-psychologize if something weren't the way that it was, which is just like very, very difficult to do. So, I asked the question not because I thought that you were going to be able to, know thyself in some kind of complete and total manner, but just because I was kind of curious if you had any kind of inklings. And the fact that you think that the young Earth is more, or I should say, less like tied up with religion than the geocentrism is really interesting. Let me ask you, so I'm not familiar with like arguments for geocentrism at all, other than like, well, hey, look, there's some Bible verses that kind of imply it. Also, if you take a look at like any kind of official Catholic teaching before Galileo, it seems like this was just implicitly kind of assumed. And that's kind of it as far as I know. So what other arguments are out there, and how did you even get into geocentrism in the first place?
Well, in the first place, I kind of like to be a somewhat of a contrarian, and so my parents weren't geocentrists, and some people at church were, and so I was researching it and came to that. Someone, I think, it was my teenage rebellion.
Rebellion, that's
Um,
funny.
but I mean, I'm not an expert in any of these things.
Oh, me
Uh,
neither.
I mean, I do have some mathematical training, but that's about it as relations to this field. But the basic argument, and I'll probably get stuff wrong, but something people can look up is there was an experiment starting in the late 1800s and then repeated several hundred times into the 1900s um, on verifying the existence of ether, um, which was a substance that was hypothesized to take up space. So then space wasn't considered a vacuum, but rather the substance called ether was thought to permeate the universe. And they basically, it's called the Michelson-Morley experiment. And it's used nowadays a lot. It'll be in textbooks, but not in the geocentric sense, but in the proof of Einstein's time dilation. So basically, what they did was shoot, I mean, this is going to be massively oversimplified, and I haven't looked into it in a while.
Good for me, because I think I need it massively oversimplified.
But so we're spinning around the sun at kilometers a second. I think maybe like 10 or 20 kilometers a second. I mean, just unimaginable speeds. And then also spinning, and this is the heliocentric model, spinning at a rate of about 2,000 miles per hour. So theoretically, if the Earth is going through ether, you should be able to measure, if you shoot a laser or something and then shoot it back, that's going to stretch, because it's having to go through something. And you can measure when it returns and go okay, this has, this gives us a measurement of 20,000 kilometers a second. Because that's quite fast. You'll get a different length that the light travels.
And sorry, what's the light bouncing off of and returning to us?
Yeah, it's you can look up I think Wikipedia has a nice diagram of the experimental apparatus.
Okay.
But just for abstraction's sake, just think okay, we got this ball moving around and we shot something out and shot it back, and then we shot something out and shot it back from a different direction. And then we can measure how different they return. So this one is going against the grain, and so it's going to come back later than the one we just shot up and down, because the apparatus is not affected by up and down motion.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I was imagining something like shooting like a laser into space, and the only reason I was is because I thought that, and this is just me not understanding what people consider ether to be, but I thought that people thought that ether was in outer space. But it's the theory that there's also ether
it's permeating, yeah.
It's everywhere. We walk through ether every day, kind of.
Yeah, and maybe I'm messing this up, but that this is my memory of the experiment.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and so here's the basic thing: is they got nothing, except they got a little bit. So they measured the spin of the Earth, but not the revolution of the Earth.
Okay.
And so there's two interpretations of this. One is the Einsteinian interpretation, which is since everything was going so fast, the measurement apparatus shrunk by Einsteinian relativity that little bit. And then the geocentric interpretation is that the Earth is basically spinning but not revolving around the sun. Because there was a measurement, you can't just say there's just nothing out there. It's the apparatus either shrunk or they didn't measure the revolution. And this is a falsifiable thing. You just have to do a Michelson-Morley experiment on in outer space, if on a planet that was far enough away.
And we haven't done that, obviously, right?
No.
Yeah. What's the general opinion of I guess just NASA and just pictures of outer space and stuff like that? And I guess just what's the broader opinion of the scientific community, I guess, since heliocentrism seems to be considerably more popular, I guess. Is the general consensus among people who hold to geocentrism that there is a conspiracy, or do you think it's a lot more along the lines of no, there's not a whole big conspiracy, it's just there's a couple people at the top who don't like?
No, there's no conspiracy. The math works either way, because the relative motion of the planets map on top of each other. So in this view, the sun is revolving around the Earth once per year. and the planets are revolving around the sun still, because else retrograde motion wouldn't happen. And then all the math works. I mean, we calculated going to the moon using a geocentric math, or you can calculate stuff using heliocentric math. The math works either way, because you can't tell inside of a moving system how it's working. You only know how it's moving. And I mean, we both have the same data. There's nothing that can't be explained by relative motion.
So
there's a scientist called Dr. Wolfgang Smith that has some very interesting books on the topic. I think he was a contemporary of Einstein's, and he's out of Germany. There was a famous documentary that came out called the I can't remember. Robert Sungenis came out with it, but there was somebody from Star Trek voiced the documentary, and then they got in trouble because they didn't realize they were narrating a geocentrism documentary.
That's kind of funny.
But that was pretty humorous. But I'm not an expert on the topic. But if people are interested, I would read the works of Wolfgang Smith.
If you don't mind switching gears a little bit, if you want to talk about young Earth creationism at all, young Earth creationism at all, I think that'd be cool. So I'll tell you that I'm not super familiar with the Colby Center, except for one article that I read about genetic decay, and I actually did like a whole write-up about it, where I was like just very, very confused about what genetic decay was supposed to accomplish. But I guess, what is your opinion about young Earth creationism in terms of like modern science? Do you think that like a lot of scientists are honestly mistaken, or like a similar question to the geocentrist question, but this time for young Earth creationism? What do you think about, conspiracy?
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think and I don't know anything about genetics, but on certain sorts of dating methods, I think we're just coming at it from completely different assumptions. So like uranium decays into lead at a rate that we can measure. And I mean, young Earth creationists might quibble with the fact that we're assuming that the rate of decay hasn't changed. But the biggest thing for me is in all of these dating methods for rocks and so forth, the half-life. So say you have this thing of uranium, and then later on half of it is decayed into lead. We know through mathematical equations how to calculate how long that took. But for that, we're assuming that there was no uranium or there was no lead when the world was created. So I don't say like God created a world that looks old, but I think the world was created such that it does look old if you think it looks old. Do you know what I mean? And so for example, if uranium decays into lead at a rate of I think it takes maybe 500 million years. I mean, I'm just making up stuff at this point. And then if you were to get your rock and say, well, this rock is 500 million years old. Well, you're assuming that there was no lead in it to begin with. So there's all sorts of issues with the those dating methods, like Mount St. Helens when it exploded in the 80s. They dated those rocks, and it said it was multiple millions of years old. So I think all the science is correct. I think there's certain underlying assumptions that you might have that change what you see in different fields.
That makes sense. The only like young Earth creationist thing that I'm like familiar at all with, I guess I'll say, is I know that people will talk about light a lot because we're pretty darn sure that we know the speed of light and that the speed of light is constant, and it's constant everywhere in the universe as far as we can tell, and it hasn't changed over time, and we can see stars, so we're pretty sure. Yeah. Do you know? Because I just plain old don't know the young Earth creationist response to like the idea that we can see light that we know, right? That we know is older than 10,000 years old and all that. Do you? And if you don't know the young Earth creationist response, that's totally fine because I don't know either.
So I think this is the and somebody probably has a good explanation. But I think there's multiple. I do think that's the. That is, you've hit on the one thing that I don't know insanely much about. I mean, one theory is that the universe is some sort of, and I'm just making this up on the spot because I like mathematical objects, not on the spot, but so say the universe is this big. There's a certain mathematical object where you can never get to the edge. But the distance between 2 points exponentially increases as you approach the edge at massive distances. So if you're like right before the edge, you can never actually get there. So I think this problem could be solved with basically embedded four-dimensional shapes. Also, something I've thought about is, I mean, if we're on some sort of four-dimensional projection into 3 dimensions, then we're going to be seeing stars twice as far away that are the same star that we saw. So if there's a star here, we might be seeing twice as far away that star here only because we're in some sort of torus and we're seeing around, because we don't know. I mean, they say that the curvature in 4 dimensions is 0, which is also very interesting. But they keep changing measurements on that. It'd be interested to see what we get the curvature to be once their methods improve.
Yeah, and I have to admit, as soon as you start talking about fourth dimensions, it's all Greek to me at that point,
Yeah, and mathematicians just love to make stuff up. But
yeah, my math extends as far as an undergrad degree in chemical engineering will get you, which for me was like I took like Calc 4, like Diff EQ.
Okay.
And that's as far as I went. So
you stopped right before it got interesting.
That's what all my math major friends would tell me.
Yeah, I have some. I'm not. I have a degree in math, and then I was working on a upper level degree, but then I got a really good job up here and figured I could read some math books on the side and have some money would be nice.
Bingo. Yep. There's a reason I only have a bachelor's degree, and that's because my bachelor's degree has served me very well, and I haven't needed to go back to school. So
and honestly, it was the computer science degree that really, that's the one that did it.
I have a couple of friends who they wound up doing an undergrad degree in engineering, and then they went and got their master's degree in math, or they double majored and they did like another bachelor's degree in math. And whenever I would ask them, like, was it worth it? And I was like, nope. No, it was not. My engineering degree, or like I had comp sci friends too, and they all said the same thing. So I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I think you and I are kind of in the same boat there, where it's let's go make some money in industry.
Yeah, I wish I had taken more Russian. I took a lot of Russian culture and stuff classes. Ooh. Didn't take any language. If I'd taken a language, I would have had a minor. But it's probably a good thing that I didn't. I got a very sensible degree. If I went back now, I'd probably study like Russian literature and philosophy or something, and be broke, and I would not be in my own basement.
I always say that if I won the lottery, I will go back to school, but it won't be for a master's degree in engineering. It'll be for something like, honestly, I really like music, so I would want to go learn crazy music theory and stuff like that. Probably history and stuff. My
sister does that. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great philosophy professor at the University of Kentucky. He's an Orthodox professor.
Yes. I forget his name, but I know who you're talking about. He's been on YouTube channels and stuff like that.
Yeah, you should have see if you can get him on. That would be
That would be
quite
actually super
interesting.
cool. I
He's really-
yeah, I guess I live 10 minutes from UK, and like I haven't like really thought about like doing stuff. There I don't think he's still there, but there was this guy named Joe Nickel who was like a PhD investigative journalist, which is like a weird thing. But he's done a lot of like research on like miracles and stuff like that. So I've included his research like hyperlinked in like a lot of my videos. Not a lot, but in like more than one video. And I always get a kick out of seeing like Joe Nickel, like University of Kentucky. I always get like a kick out of that. But my university didn't offer language. I went to a polytechnic school, so I went to the New Jersey Institute of Technology. So I was only doing STEM, no languages, which is sad because like I used to be like somewhat fluent in Spanish. And when I say somewhat fluent, I mean I would go to work and I would spend a whole work shift speaking Spanish. So I knew kitchen Spanish really well.
Okay. Yeah, I worked on a farm where everyone else spoke Spanish.
Did you pick it up?
I mean, like at the end of the summer, I could get basic commands, but my language skills are I'm barely fluent in English. So I'm interested in like the literature and the culture of all these places, but as soon as I try to like, oh no, this time I'm going to like figure out how to, and it doesn't work.
How's your Latin? And did you ever have to actually learn learn Latin as part
I finished Henley. We homeschooled and did Memorial Press.
Okay.
I finished Henley Latin, so we did some sort of by the end I would say my Latin is vaguely tolerable. I could never speak it or anything. I mean, UK has all these really good classicists, but like if given time, I can read I could tell you about what an ecclesiastical Latin thing says. But these people reading Ovid and stuff, I mean, those sentences are absolutely unparsable for my brain.
Oh, well, so first of all, same. But then second of all, people used to make fun of my Latin accent because I had an ecclesiastical Latin accent, which now I understand just to be Italian. Like it's just a modern Italian accent.
Yeah. I think that whole debate is very superfluous. I think some of the Romans talked like weenie weenie weechi, and some of them said vini vini vici, and that's what the classicist friends tell me. Like it's more like a
interesting. Okay.
It's not so much a it was like Rome is huge, and they developed certain dialects, but
that makes sense. I mean,
nowadays we have such crazy different accents, and we can like watch each other online. I mean, imagine you get letters from something every 100 years or whatever. Your accents are going to be crazy different.
And the Roman Empire, you think they spoke Latin in Spain the same way that they spoke Latin in Israel? Like,
yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely not.
That's right. Yeah, Israel is not communicating with Spain that often.
Right. Yeah, that makes me feel better too because I went from I went to like an FSSP school, and I learned Latin there, and then I went to a public high school, and I actually didn't take Latin there. I took Spanish. But I had friends who took Latin, and so like sometimes I'd be like, "Let me see your Latin homework," and I was I was okay at Latin, but I would speak it out loud, and they would laugh at me, and they'd be like, "You're not pronouncing it right." I'm like, "No, you're not pronouncing it right."
We're probably both wrong. I mean, how they get the pronunciation is off of the poetry.
I never like thought about that.
That's usually how they can tell sort of accents and stuff is how they're doing things in poetry. But classical Latin poetry is not really like any of the Latin poems that you hear like in church,
right?
Or the medieval Latin. So I mean, I think it's kind of hard to extrapolate from poems.
Yeah, how would you get
that don't rhyme?
Right. How would you get the VW distinction just from like looking at like poetry? I don't even.
This is where I have no idea.
Me neither. Me neither. All I knew is that I was very spiritedly defending ecclesiastical Latin pronunciations.
Yeah,
For no other reason than I was a trad.
I mean, you hear the Germans invented that whole thing in the 1700s just to be important, and I mean, the Germans do tend to do stuff like that, so I don't find it beyond the realm of possibility.
That's really funny. See, I didn't know any of that. That's kind of cool.
I say that as a my sister likes to claim quite Austrian, but I don't know if we're as Austrian as she thinks we are. But
hey, look, if you're American, then you're a little bit of everything. That's kind of how we're. So I don't use my real last name on YouTube too often, but you know it because we've been emailing. My real last name's O'Connor. You would think I'm like super Irish. I'm 50% Irish, but 50, and the other part of me is just a mutt. So how Irish am I? Really?
I mean, 50% is pretty good.
I guess
my grandmother did a 23andMe. People convinced her to do it, and she was like, "No, I'm 100% Irish." Sure enough, it comes back 100% Irish.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
she's very Irish.
I have cousins who. So my dad is the son of Irish immigrants. So my dad is 100%. My dad's brother married somebody who's also 100% Irish. So I have first cousins who are 100% Irish. But my mom is not Irish at all, so I'm only 50%. My cousins took 23andMe, and they got 100% Irish. I haven't done it. I'm tempted to because my mom doesn't really know what she is. She would tell me
I don't know how, because it doesn't propagate like so. It only goes through certain like lines.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not like you do it and it goes back all the way. There's several different types of tests you can take. And one is like the mother line, like the mothers, and then there's some other ones, but it's not going to tell you like it's only traversing a couple branches on the tree.
That stuff is crazy to me. Like the idea that like we can like, you know, spit into a tube and then mail it somewhere and they can tell us our genetics. Like that's like wild to me, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. I mean, that's why Francis Clark thinks that aliens seeded us here. He's the discoverer of DNA.
Oh yeah. He thinks that we were seeded by aliens.
Yeah, or he thinks some intelligence seeded, like not in terms of like a religious sense, like some intelligence from the universe seeded us here because of the genetic code. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if me and him would see eye to eye on that one.
Mm-hmm. First, I was actually quite interested in why you're a mereological nihilist as opposed to, for example, a mereological universalist, and why you would reject the sort of middle ground, what's it called? Mereological,
just like non-nihilism about mereology,
or non-nihilistic, or like, why would you choose the nihilism over the or just like everything is one? I think it's called mereological universalism.
Yeah. So, in some sense, I'm not like super opposed to like mereological universalism, but I just don't think it's very useful. Because at that point, all that you're trying to say is like the universe exists, and I'm like, yes, the universe exists. Cool, we agree. Now, if you want to say anything more specific about anything, the mereological universalist kind of can't, because like the only thing that exists is everything that exists. And on the one hand, I do want to affirm that like, yeah, all of the things that exist are indeed the only things that exist. Almost anybody will affirm that, right? Like, yeah. And theists will affirm that because, like, you know, theists will gladly say, yeah, only the things that exist are the things that exist. God is one of those things that exists, right? Like, it's just, I just find it, like, not super useful to talk about it that way. And then also, it just kind of seems like I just don't know if I see a reason. Like, I definitely see some kind of mereological symbol, right? Like, we keep on thinking that we have it, and then we drill down further, and we realize that there's, like, another layer. But we've always thought that there were some kind of symbol, right? We used to think that they were atoms, and then we thought that they were protons, neutrons, electrons, then we thought that they were quarks. Now we think that they might be fields. Okay, maybe we'll find something underneath the fields one day. But it seems to me like we've always kind of thought that there was some kind of unit of basic measurement.
Yeah.
That still seems right to me.
I agree with you. The thing is, almost all those critiques, my brain is then applying it to the nihilism, the Mereological Nihilism, because I don't think you can say anything. But so yeah, why? What's wrong with composite objects? I mean, and this has been around. I think like there was a Greek philosopher, Zeno, who thought everything was one, and then
right?
I think Epicurus, the one who said all the deep sayings that we don't have any books of, but people just quoted him. He's the one who said some air, some fire, some water, but in reality, atoms in the void.
Ooh, that's
I always like that quote. But I think he was he said pretty much everything, but I think he was the Mereological Nihilist of the Greeks.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess first, I don't disagree that it becomes difficult to talk about anything under a Mereological Nihilist framework. That's why I don't talk about like I speak fictionally as if composite objects do exist. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't speaking fictionally, I could never say you, like I'm not talking to you. I would have to say I'm speaking to a collection of mereological simples arranged Daniel-wise. And that's just a whole big mouthful of things to say, so I don't. Now, what's wrong with composite objects? So I actually think that there's nothing wrong with talking about composite objects fictionally, but there actually kind of is a problem with composite objects when you try to get very specific with what you're talking about. What I mean by that is this. So imagine me. I'm a composite object. I eat an apple. An apple is another composite object. At some point, the apple becomes part of me. And it's not at all obvious to me when the apple becomes part of me. But all of those atoms in the apple, they enter my body, and a lot of them become part of my body. And a lot of them also leave my body, too, later on. But some of those atoms become the atoms in my body. And, like, it's not at all obvious to me, like, when they become part of my body. It kind of seems to me like an arbitrary distinction as to when the apple stops existing. You know, and then with humans, it's the same way, too. You know, like, it's not easy to say when a human starts existing. I know we like to think that it's simple, right? Like, when the two cells meet. But even then, it's like, well, okay, like the first time that they touch, they're gonna sit next to each other for a long time before the one goes inside the other.
I actually don't think the soul is infused at fertilization.
Ooh, you're like a little more with Aquinas on this one.
Yeah, I think and I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, no, definitely 40 days for men, 80 days for women. Like I don't know when the soul is, and it very well could be infused there, but I doubt the soul is infused before the form takes place. But sorry, I maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But I just wanted to say, I think I sort of had three things with the Mereological Nihilism. One is, I think there's a little bit of a I think there's an example called, like, I'm sure you've heard of it, the beard example. Like I can say this man has a long beard. I mean, I don't know if we can say for sure I have a beard or not, but the biker dude whose beard is touching the floor certainly has a beard, and I don't think we can say like, oh, just because I can't say when it starts doesn't mean we can say when there is one. Because I think the one important thing for knowledge is, I mean, there's intuitions which are sort of like soft proofs, say, but I don't know what they're called, but like the intuition of I see it here, like counts not so much like what I feel in my mind, but what my sense perception counts for quite a bit. And then the other thing is when you start to do paradoxes of like accept paradoxes of when certain things happen and when they don't, I think you have a hard time defending like any sort of simple at all. Because like you run into the Zeno paradoxes, which basically there's there's the famous one with I shoot the arrow at you, right? And it goes halfway and then halfway again and then halfway to you again and then halfway to you again. And so
Distance.
and so it never will get you. But obviously, if I shoot you, you're going to get hit. There's another interesting one where, say you freeze time, and there's the arrow in the air. That is motionless at that freezed moment in time. So I can't remember where I was going with that. But it seems to me you can draw up some very difficult examples with motion to prove that motion doesn't exist. And in a very similar line of reasoning as, say, a ship of Theseus example for composite objects. So
Yeah. So I guess maybe I'll start with the kind of like, I think the fallacy of the beard is like often like what it's referred to as. And it's funny. I know Matt Fradd will talk about the beard a lot, and he'll say like, hey, like, I might not be able to tell you exactly the moment that it, it's a 5 o'clock shadow turns into a beard, but I know a beard when I see it. And so to that, I kind of say, so like Matt Fradd and other people will say like, just because I can't tell you when it starts doesn't mean I can't tell you that it starts eventually. And my point is kind of like, no, that's exactly like, because you don't know exactly what it is, it seems very difficult for me to find like a non-arbitrary way to define it. So we're like kind of like looking at the same thing, and I'm saying like, yes, that's exactly the reason why I'm a nihilist about mereology. And I think for a lot of people, I think it comes down to like an intuition, like you said, kind of, like people are just, well, no, but I see a beard, and I don't deny that, like that you see a beard. I just think that our intuitions can also be satisfied by a collection of mereological symbols arranged beard-wise. I don't think that we actually have to be committed to any kind of composite object in order to satisfy that intuition. As weird as that sounds, that's kind of my take on the whole like fallacy of the beard.
do you think the symbols have matter at all? I've thought about. I mean, I think about this a lot. Sometimes I reason myself out of existence, and then I realize I'm still there. But I mean, I bet, yeah. Do you think they have matter? And can you, like, would we be able to get to the bottom, or could anything I say, here's the simple, you could cut in half? Because the problem is if you can cut it in half always, but yet there's still simples that have density or whatever, then I feel like everything is infinitely large. And if there's nothing at the bottom, then there's nothing.
Yeah. So I have to at this point like admit like I don't know what I don't know. And so I'm gonna say like the only honest answer I can give you is just I plain old don't know, but I will share my
theory,
my intuitions with you. So yeah, I do think that there is something at the bottom, and it might not have matter per se, but it would have matter energy at least, because matter and energy are the same thing. So like if there's some kind of field, and that field gets excited at certain spots, and so that energy is actually like the basic building block of what everything is, fine. There's matter energy at a certain point, and then we macroscopically view that matter energy as plain old matter, like cool. But I do think that something has to be there, like some, if we're cool with kind of referring to matter energy as just plain old matter, then I would say that yes, I expect that there has to be some amount of matter that is like the smallest amount of matter, and that's at least one of the simples.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, and I'm way out of my knowledge here, but that the field, like I would think that's not the simple either, because the field is what's producing the energy that has the potential to be manifested as matter. So I think you're back to a field now.
Right, the field might be the simple, and if
okay, that's what you're saying.
Right.
I got that.
It might be. So my understanding of this kind of physics is very limited. I'm a chemical engineer. I'm not a physicist. But I do understand that modern theories are that there are actually fields at the bottom of everything, and that what we perceive as matter is really just certain fields being, excited to certain energy levels and things like that. So perhaps those fields are what's at the simples. And there might be tons and tons of fields. Like I'm not saying that there's definitely one kind of simple. Like there might be 10 different fields from which, there could be, I don't know how many.
Yeah, there could be, everything could be its own simple.
Oh geez, yeah, that would be weird. But I can't rule that out probably. But yeah, so when I kind of like strip away everything from the beard, I realize that there is no way for us to actually tell you what's a beard or what's not, but there is a fictionally useful way for us to talk to each other, because we have to talk to each other. So we can use language fictionally to refer to beards, and we know what we're talking about when we refer to beards. But just because we know what we're talking about doesn't mean that there's not some, like, just because we understand each other doesn't mean that our language still isn't arbitrary. Like, I will still argue that all language is still arbitrary. Words only mean what we agree that they mean, and beards, we generally agree that, like, they're at least like an inch of hair or something like that, or half an inch of hair. Like anything less than half an inch and it's not a beard, it's a 5 o'clock shadow or something like that. That's fine. But there's still it's still arbitrary. And so that's why I would have to maintain that beards per se do not exist. What do exist are simples arranged beard-wise.
Yeah, and I think I would, in the end, dig my myself into the even if we can logic ourselves into not existing. I know that I exist, so I plant my my flag here.
So I kind of do as well. I kind of also, like, I'm almost planting my flag right there with you. It's just what I am is the collection of Mereological simples arranged me-wise.
I know there's some Protestants who hold that there's and I don't think this can be reconciled with Catholicism, but that there's there are simples and humans.
Yes. Well, it's not only Protestants. Ted Sider's teacher. So Ted Sider wrote Against Parthood, which is the paper that like convinced me of Mereological Nihilism, and Peter Van Inwagen.
I've heard of him.
Peter Van Inwagen is a Mereological Nihilist about everything except for the organics, and the organics would include me and you, but it would also include, Fido, our pet dog, and the fish outside in the river and the birds. All of the organics are going to be the only real composite objects, according to Peter Singer. And by the way, Aquinas isn't that far away from Peter Singer.
No, prime matter stuff.
Yeah, Aquinas is quite happy to say that like a house is not a real composite object, and Aquinas would talk about continuous and contiguous objects. So a continuous, like you and I are continuous objects because like we actually like, we're continuous, but then like a house is not continuous because like you can take the bricks away from the house and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, and like a brick wall that makes up a house is not continuous, it's contiguous because like you can take apart the pieces and stuff like that. And according to Aquinas, contiguous objects are not legitimately composite objects. They are just
Yeah, just yeah. But they're not just so like a chair wouldn't exist per se, but it's not just this. It's not just. As far as it's not just simples. For Aquinas, it's that's just wood that's been. It's just wood.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I'm perfectly fine with.
I think most people are
with
fine
that.
with,
That seems quite reasonable to me.
Yeah. I think most people are kind of right there with me when it comes to objects like a chair. Like although not everyone, because some people like really fiercely want to defend like all composite objects. Some people, but you know, just in the conversations that I've had, most people seem pretty cool about the idea of being like, you know, mereologically nihilist about things like houses and cars. But when it comes,
yeah, but it's not exactly mereological because you still believe like the it's more like a collection of composite objects as opposed to simples all the way down.
Yes.
Or not all the way, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. A lot of people are happy to be a lot of people are happy to admit that cars are not objects per se. Cars are made up of other objects, other composite objects. But humans are indeed an object, and you know, and I, the nihilist, kind of just deny both. And I know that makes me sound crazy, but I do firmly think that like an actual understanding of mereological nihilism, like you realize that we kind of like we have the same data, we're just looking at it through different lenses. You know what I mean? Because like nobody disagrees that we're made up of smaller, like, you know, even humans are made up of atoms, right? Like everything's made up of atoms.
I mean, I have reason in my shower philosophizing. I've get down there pretty quick, but
right. There was, I think you had a third point about mereological nihilism, and I only addressed two. I addressed the beard, and then also, hey, just what's wrong with composite objects. Did I miss something?
Oh, I think the other one was that similar objections can be levied at the existence of motion.
That's right. That's right. So,
and to me, I mean, I think the logic in any realm can sort of be applied such that in that small area, you're the nihilist of that area. So how do you sort of, it seems to imply some sort of either radical skepticism and, in the case of the Zeno's paradox, at least a denial of motion.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of think about both similarly, I guess. So in the same sense that I talk about, like, I think that there are simples out of which everything else is arranged. And the simples are like the most basic unit of like arranging things. I also, and you know, I'm going to say that I know this. I know that there's also a basic unit of distance, and that's the Planck length, the Planck distance. That is the smallest unit by which anything can move ever. And so all of a sudden, it's actually not true to say that you have to move in infinities of distance. You have to move a non-infinite number of Planck units away.
So this is, I need to read more about these. I'm very skeptical of these Planck units, but I know nothing about this. You'll have to send me something about this.
And to be honest, I haven't read about Planck units in a long time, but it's PLANC, I want to say, or is it? Oh, CK. Planck length. If I just Google, and here's what I can do too. So here is what the Planck length is equal to. It's equal to 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35th meters. That's how small it is. But that's still actually like shockingly like larger than you might think, I guess.
So the thing that's the smallest measure that anything can move.
And if you look at that, it's 10 times it's 10 to the power of negative 20 times the diameter of a proton. So we're talking about like protons make the Planck length look like if you measure the diameter of a proton in Planck length, a proton seems huge, which is crazy how small a Planck length is.
Yeah, I wonder.
So let's see.
I'm wondering how they know this is basically.
That's a really good question. I do remember that it was.
I thought this was just. I thought this was just like the equivalent of very small centimeters that people who were doing quantum stuff were measuring things in. But
Let's see.
you're saying they're saying it is this. This is very interesting. Yeah, I'll have to read about this.
Yeah, we don't have to read about it like, on camera, but yeah, it's interesting stuff. And the way that I understand it is that it's literally the smallest unit of distance. And then if that's the case, then there is no infinite like halves. Like eventually you'll start measuring things in Planck units. And then once you do, it's finite. It's a huge number, but it's a finite distance.
Yeah.
And so no more paradox. That's kind of the way that I view it anyway.
I wonder if there's a Zeno paradox that doesn't require that. I'll have to look in. I thought I recalled one that didn't even require the distance, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that would suck for me if I'm being a little facetious here, but if like one day we found out that like Planck units like that doesn't exist, then I guess like Zeno's paradox is back on kind of. But for to the best of my understanding, I'm not super concerned about moving an infinite distance because you can keep cutting it in half, because you can't keep cutting it in half because of the Planck unit.
Because of the Planck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that if this is true, then then motion, you have motion again.
Yeah. And I guess part of my probably part of my acceptance of both, like, I would deny that motion's impossible, and I likewise am a Mereological Nihilist. I think that part of that both stems from just I have like a strong aversion to the idea that there are actual infinites out there. Like that just seems like I think I just have like an intuition that like there are no actual infinites, and so it seems to me like there has to be a smallest unit of like us, like arrangement, and there has to be a smallest unit of distance as well, and like a smallest unit of time even. So I guess that's just kind of part of my reasoning, I guess, is just I have like some strong aversion to the idea that there might be an actual infinite out there. And if there are actual infinites, then like, all the worse for me, I guess. But that, I don't know. That's a little bit of self-psychologizing, I guess. Well,
Comprendo.
Yeah. Hey, I've kept you for over an hour. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on? And if not, I'm happy to kind of wrap it up here, and I'll hit the stop recording button.
Yeah, I think if we went into anything else, then we would be here for a while.
Well, hey, there's no rule against us doing this a second time too. So
maybe we could do it again and talk about nihilistic fiction and film. There's some pretty interesting
I think that'd be cool
stuff out there with that. So yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome, man. I'm gonna go ahead and hit stop recording.